Stop me if you've heard this before on the Matt Barrie Show presented by Allstate. I come out here looking like I got 3 hours of sleep because usually that's true. I got bedhead everywhere. And I sit here and I say, we've been blessed with one of the great recaps we're going to have all season long on the Matt Barrie Show presented by Allstate. So here we go. Bullet point one today we're going to touch on. What happened to Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin at the Swamp? Bullet point number one. Bullet point number two. Alabama didn't score a touchdown against Oklahoma, a 5-5 Oklahoma team on the road. Bullet point number two. Bullet point number three, Deion Sanders after the game. We controlled our own destiny and we fumbled it. Bullet point number four, Indiana, the story that's been that was, should the story continue as we embark on the final regular season weekend of college football? Having said all of that, it is time to check in, presented by Allstate with the great Paul Finebaum, as we do each and every Sunday morning. Okay, Paul, we didn't think we'd get another crazy weekend, and lo and behold, here we have it, heading into Thanksgiving week. Here's where I'd like to start. We're going to go in chronological order with the time that the game happened. I want to start in the noon window. Ole Miss, Florida. What happened?
Well, unfortunately, Ole Miss found a hot team and just simply looked like they did against Kentucky about 2 months ago. And yeah, I feel badly because we sat here 2 weeks ago, praising Lane Kiffin, finally winning the biggest game of his career. And now he has lost the biggest game of his career because uh, clearly knocked them out of the playoffs. I don't see they played. Listen, I mean, it came down to the final couple of seconds, so it wasn't like they only scored 3 points and got rolled over. I know we'll get to that game in a few minutes, but I don't see them coming back. And it's the real unfortunate thing is this is the best Ole Miss team in 60 years. It was Lane Kiffin's best shot, and if he can't win with these guys, you have to ask the question, who can he win with?
Yeah, so that's where I want to hang out. I want to hang out in that zip code for a minute because we said on here last week and said that Ole Miss team, there's a version of Ole Miss out there that can beat anybody in the country. Like that version exists that gets into the bracket and wins a national championship. Then there's the other version that exists. And that's the version that they couldn't avoid themselves from being when they didn't need it the most. And I'm just shocked that with that kind of team, that other version existed more than once. So it makes you wonder why it's there 3 times this season.
Yeah, no, Matt, we can't solve it this morning. There's a disconnect. I mean, I think there was one play on that final drive. Justin Dart had a receiver drop it. It probably didn't help that Trey Harris came back and got hurt. But
Yeah.
it doesn't. I mean, he's got talent all over the field, and I mean, there just isn't really an excuse. Florida is an ascending team, and listen, Billy Napier deserves mucho credit. But we weren't just talking about Ole Miss being a good SEC team. I mean, I sat with people Saturday morning. One said Ole Miss is the best team in the country. They're going to win the national championship. That was not a stretch when they are playing peak like they were against Georgia. So it has to rest somewhere at the top, and I blame Lane Kiffin. I know that sounds like I'm just passing a few exit signs, but he ultimately is the head coach, and he has to have his team in positions to win games when you're playing a five-loss team. I mean, this
Yeah, they're
wasn't.
5-5.
Yeah, I mean, and so I mean, where else do you want to? Yeah, I mean, Jackson Dart looked terrible on that final series, but at that point he was kind of in the 15th round and just being, bloodied and bludgeoned.
Yeah, and I was one of those in the game. Mullen and I think we said on the broadcast Thursday night during our game that Ole Miss was one of those teams. It's like if you're IDing a team that's going to get in, because we penciled in, we're like, they're going to go to Florida, they're going to get the win, and then they're going to go beat the hell out of Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl. 10-2, Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin's getting his dream. You don't have to play the conference championship, you're in. And we're sitting there saying, man, that team will beat anybody.
Yeah,
And now here we are, Sunday, November 24th. They're going to be out. And they're going to have a team
yeah,
that's
they're
got
out.
a healthy payroll, that was a transfer portal dream. Lane Kiffin had the squad. And in a game, here's the irony of all this. It's in a game at the place where people were connecting Lane Kiffin and the dots with Billy Napier, and Billy Napier, who's done an amazing job coaching this year, say what you want, gets the last laugh in this entire conversation.
Yeah, and by the way, I know a lot of people think, we just throw that stuff up against the wall, but we weren't. I mean, there was a way for forgetting what Florida did, but if Florida had just continued to lose and the thing had gotten out of control. Remember, in the second or third week in September, there were reports out of Florida that Napier was getting bought out.
Right.
And I said to you one of those mornings, and I think you agreed that Lane Kiffin would be the likely choice. And I think he would have taken it, presuming or assuming that Ole Miss was out of the playoffs. And that's the irony. They're out of the playoffs now, but there's no job, and the guy that he was going to succeed just beat him. And I don't know what that means because Lane Kiffin's a really smart guy.
Yep.
He knows this was his shot. And I'm sure if you're an Ole Miss fan, you say, "Oh, well, what do you mean? I mean, we can come back." I don't know about that. I mean, to me, it's not that easy for Ole Miss to be the best team in the country, which I thought they were yesterday before that game.
Yeah, yeah, and look, we taped this. It's 9:55 Sunday morning, so the Associated Press poll hasn't been released. The college football playoff rankings haven't been released because those get released Tuesday night. Could we sit here like on election night and map a path to victory for Ole
Sure.
Miss? Maybe, but the likelihood is not. So, big picture, where does Ole Miss go from here after this roster and a schedule? I mean, you should not be losing to Kentucky. You just shouldn't. Where do they go from here?
Well, I want to make it clear. I think Lane Kiffin is an excellent football coach.
Yes, 100%.
And their reasons, and I don't know what they are. And people told me close to that program when I was there a few weeks ago that the one reason they were playing better against Georgia than they were against Kentucky, that with so many free agents, it takes a while, and finally they got the rhythm. So there's just no excuse. I think you'll hear Lane Kiffin's name. I don't know if there'll be any legitimate openings this year, but I think at some point he's got to have to take a deep, long look. I almost went to Auburn. He would say to himself, I thought about Florida. Do I continue here? Do I look to the NFL? I don't know, but I guarantee you that Lane Kiffin, once he wraps up the Egg Bowl, will have to do some soul searching.
Yeah, and I'm with you. We connect the dots quite a bit in studio because of who I sit next to of job openings. And I don't think this is getting boring a stunner. Like, I mean, this marriage isn't going to happen again. I'm just talking trickle effect here. Let's just say Lincoln Riley, for some reason, got a job in the NFL.
Right,
Well,
right.
that means USC opens up and another job opens up, and there's the connectivity
The
of the dots.
domino.
But again, Lane Kiffin's a really, really brilliant offensive mind. Lane Kiffin has put together a really, really good roster, and they just didn't show up when they needed to most. And so
No.
Ole Miss likely out. Florida, congratulations, Billy Napier. I'm wondering if the Billy Napier situation ends up being like Kentucky a few years ago, where Mark Stoops hadn't won in a long, long time, and there was conversations about maybe him going, and he built that into one of the more successful runs. Now I get it, different programs, but example being, if you hang on to the coach maybe a little bit longer than you wanted to, maybe some good things come out of it. It appears that's where we're headed with Billy Napier. The nightcap in the SEC, to me, was the biggest stunner of the day. Well, why is that? Because we sat here for the past month saying Alabama found it. They're fine. They figured out how to use Jalen Milroe. They got over that little 3-game hump. They're good. Alabama's going to get in the SEC championship. All things are fine in Tuscaloosa. And then they've lost 3 games for the first time, I believe, in 13 years since 2011. They didn't score a touchdown against Oklahoma, a 5-5 team. And now, Paul, here we are, Alabama out.
Yeah, Matt, it was 2010, the last time Alabama lost 3 games. That was after their national championship season. And I mean, there are so many check marks about this. I mean, we're in terms of last time Alabama scored 3 points, last time. Let me cut to the chase. It was simply inexcusable. And you can blame anyone you want, but you would be smart to start at the very top because that team did not look prepared. They didn't look focused. They didn't look like they had a clue what they were getting into. And I don't know how that could be the case because everyone who watches football knew that Brent Venables had an elite defense. They just have no offense because of all the wide receivers being hurt and chaos at quarterback. And I just don't understand it. And that loss was a body blow. And I know what my good friend Heather Dinich is saying, that there is a path for Alabama, and maybe there will be. But the real question is why? Uh, I mean, I don't understand how Alabama can be considered a legitimate playoff team, Matt. And I realize that there are probably schools in there that aren't legitimate either. But I mean, they've lost to Vanderbilt, a five-loss team, and now Oklahoma, a five-loss team. And if you were looking at a chart of the SEC, they're probably 12 and 13 out of the 16 in the league, and the other loss is at Tennessee. And I know who they have a win against, possibly the SEC champion. But please, if they get in, good for them. I'll be happy, and everybody will sing Kumbaya. But are they really a playoff team after what we saw on Saturday night? I mean, that was just hard to wrap my arms around. In the middle of the night, I'm getting texts from old line Alabama fans who are going, "What have we gotten ourselves into?" Because this is the same Alabama team in many ways. It's not. No, actually, it's not. It's a worse Alabama team than we saw against Vanderbilt. I mean, this team was completely clueless.
Lowest amount of points, fewest amount of points scored since 2004.
Coach was Mike Shua.
That's with a guy, your head coach, that's an offensive wizard in
Genius.
Kalen DeBoer. And look, can you make the connection? Yeah, Brent Venables had Alabama's number when he's the defensive coordinator at Clemson, so be it, fine. But when you look at what Alabama did to LSU, and then they have the walk with Mercer, in no war, they couldn't do anything. I mean, they were never a threat. I mean, in Jalen Milroe, we got on here. We didn't have to go check the tape. It's not tape, it's digital. But we didn't have to go check it after LSU. We sat here, Paul, and we're like, finally, use Jalen Milroe as a runner. He's the best athlete on the field. They tried to make him a thrower again last night.
Yeah.
And I just don't understand why that computed. I think the loss last night for Alabama was the worst loss of the season and the worst loss they've had in quite some time.
Yeah, Matt, so we all said, I said, the Vanderbilt loss is the worst loss in maybe the history of Alabama. It's possible this is worse, if it could be such a thing, because of what the stakes were. Alabama recovered from the Vanderbilt loss. And I think what we did is we read way too much into the Missouri win and the LSU win. DeBoer, I mean, yeah, there was a terrible call in the game, but did you see a game yesterday where there wasn't a terrible call?
Right.
If the Williams touchdown had held up, Alabama has a breath at least, a pulse. But yeah, and by the way, I'm a big fan of Brent Venables, but what he did against Nick Saban at in national championship games really doesn't have much to do. He's just a very good defensive coach, and that's all there is to it.
So it was clear, anybody watching football who knows football, it was clear that Venables went into that game and said, here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to let Jalen Milroe beat us with his legs. So we're going to stop him with his legs. We're going to make him a thrower. That was clearly the game plan last night. And we talked about this with Ole Miss. How does a team that's built with so much talent allow something like this to happen? And now Alabama fans, you have to be like, year one of Kalen DeBoer, I thought they'd be 9-3 this year. I think anyone who didn't expect a little bit of a drop off just wasn't reading the room. But something like this, I mean, if you're an Alabama fan, you should wake up a little bit angry and concerned about where this thing's headed.
Well, you are, because you have the Iron Bowl this week, and you really don't know, or maybe even care. Yeah, losing to Auburn will get you in a lot of trouble quickly, but Alabama doesn't build its season around the Iron Bowl like they did 50 years ago.
Right.
It's about being the best in the country, and again, I go back to a decision about 3 weeks into DeBoer's tenure that may be reverberating, is when I think it's when Grubb, his OC at Washington, came and left to go to I think to the Seahawks.
Seahawks, yeah.
that may have been the most important moment of the year. Of course, it would have been nice to see Caleb Downs returning punch for Alabama last night. Uh, you never know, maybe a 75-yard punt would have ignited Alabama in the third quarter when they were completely comatose. Maybe he would have picked off a pass. I mean, just maybe would have been the best player on the field. Nothing important, but the meltdown from Bama fans is going to be epic. And again, I'm not sure their level of enthusiasm for playing the math game about trying to get in is overly exciting. I mean, I think you have to ask the question, I mean, do they really belong?
Yeah.
It's hard for me to say they do.
Yeah, you'd wonder if the committee would take this opportunity to make an example out of Alabama just because of
Yeah,
the dominant Alabama we saw for 17 years under Nick Saban. But to me, this is why, and you may disagree with this, but this is why you don't take the job after a legend.
right, right.
Because in no world, I still think Kalen DeBoer is a great football coach.
Yes.
But this is why you don't do it. Because everything you do from the time you step on campus until you reach the heights of the previous guy are going to be judged, ridiculed, and criticized to the point where you may not even have a chance to follow up and build the program the way you want.
And that, listen, you sit at the tip of the spear of college football at ESPN every Saturday night, and you and I know that when Alabama loses a game like that, it takes precedent. I mean, I had forgotten at midnight that Indiana had played 12 hours earlier.
Yeah.
It was irrelevant, and that's what I was obsessing over on the whole plane ride back from Austin yesterday. Is okay, what's an objective way of looking at Indiana's loss, and now it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. And so look, I don't I don't want to get drunk thinking of all the scenarios of how they get in. Same with Ole Miss, but right now it just doesn't look good for Alabama after a loss to Oklahoma and didn't even score a touchdown with an offense like they have. One last thing on the SEC, we'll pivot. We talked about Brian Kelly a week ago. The week started off not great for Brian Kelly because Bryce Underwood, number one ranked quarterback and player and commit in the country for LSU, flipped to Michigan. Now, Brian Kelly, they get the win against Vanderbilt last night, but it was kind of a few bad things for BK in his third year in LSU that probably he just didn't want to have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean it was a terrible week for Brian Kelly, and really the biggest loss was Underwood, even more so than the Florida game because that's what fans, I should say, were building the hope for next year. And again, the Vanderbilt game was so deep under the radar screen last night because I mean I was watching the Alabama game and watching the Auburn game and I had to remember about midnight. Did what happened at LSU? I assumed that LSU won because otherwise I would have had 15 texts about Brian Kelly. So, but it was hard So, I mean, the good news is he won the game. The bad news is I don't know, how much interest there was. As long as he won, that's all that mattered. And now he plays Oklahoma, so I'm not trying to sound like I'm a shill for Brian Kelly, but he wins that game. He hopefully he gets to a decent bowl game and wins, and it's all about next year. But next year is very big.
Yeah, wins that game. I think when they finished 9-3 on the year.
They've lost four times.
Four times. So 8-4 on the year. He's got 2 10-win seasons to start his career there, but he did lose NFL receivers and a Heisman Trophy
Oh
winning
yeah.
quarterback. Maybe the preseason expectations were a little misguided from people, but look, in the SEC, preseason expectations don't matter. In-season expectations do. And I think we would all agree, at least for this year, LSU probably fell a little bit short. Stepping out of the conference in the South to the conference in the North, Paul, I would have told you with certainty we're doing the post-game show about 3:15 p.m. We're recapping Ohio State, Indiana. I would have told you on ESPN, in fact, maybe I did with Joey and Dan, that Indiana had no place being in the playoff after what we saw against Ohio State. But then everything started happening around them, and by math, they're probably still going to be in.
Well, this game was really tight other than a couple of special teams plays. Yeah, well, that's the difference between a great team and a good team. And I had them out, you're right, at 6 o'clock last night, but I don't. They're going to be in, so it really doesn't make any difference whether we think it's the right call or not.
Yeah, and I said it on the Sunday Bloody Sunday show. Like you had to go in defending the 106 ranked resume, and Kurt Signetti did. I mean, he's a boisterous, confident coach, and
Yeah.
he'll tell anyone to listen to piss off. And you can't do that and then do that.
No.
And so I was ready to say, okay, Indiana, I was wrong. If it was a 3-point game or it was a 7-point game, but mid third quarter, it's like, I mean, this was your one chance, and they didn't give us anything to take. I mean, do you take Indiana any more seriously than you did before this morning?
No, but I tell you what we need, Matt. We need like the first four and the game that we need the week before the playoffs start is Alabama versus Indiana, and because
Yeah.
uh, I mean I don't know enough about either. I mean I've watched both teams play all year and they're kind of exasperating to watch, but yeah, it's okay. Let Indiana get in there and to me then that will be a test. But good for Kirk Signetti. I mean, he never. I mean, the end of the game was just comical. You know, when the guy slid and then Ryan said, "Screw it, we want the touchdown," and that was this important touchdown. I thought
Yeah.
because before that you know the Fox boys could argue. I mean, this was a two-score game when you and I know it wasn't a two-score game, but get used to it. Unless Indiana loses to Purdue, which is what about a 4 billion to 1 shot,
Yeah.
we're going to see them.
We're going to see them. We're going to see Penn State, who
Yeah.
had to
Oh,
skate by on a fake punt against
exactly.
Minnesota. You know,
Yeah.
I so here's I understand what the masses will say. 2 loss teams, 3 loss teams, SEC, but I get it. And then you're going to look at, but I can't sit there and make a legitimate argument for Penn State because they still have, they don't have, they haven't done anything.
No, but and I think what you're going to hear from the Vox Populi is we better not get a three-loss SEC team. And Matt, the only way I could advocate that is if it's Georgia in the championship game and it's a very tight game and they lose, and then I think what the committee does is they just check a box with the best league in football, saying you earned a right in there and whatever. But beyond that. I mean, I apologize. I just grabbed an SEC jersey here,
Yeah, way to go. Way to help the narrative, Paul.
but you know, for those who are interested, I'm not going to stand up and advocate for Ole Miss and Alabama. Would you?
At the moment, no, I would not. Unless, yeah, I mean, it would have to be something of epic
Yeah.
disaster.
Now, listen. If we had a debate, if we're sitting there trying to decide Alabama, Ole Miss, Indiana, and Penn State, and that's a different story. But we're not being asked because
You,
we would never get on that committee.
you know what's funny about all this is, do you think Ole Miss would beat Penn State or Indiana?
Yes, I do.
Exactly. So that's the irony in all of it.
I mean, I saw Ole Miss beat Penn State last year, and
Right. I mean,
I mean,
we would all
but
say
yeah,
that.
but listen, I mean, after the bloodbath in the SEC yesterday, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to cover
There
my.
you go. Thank you. I appreciate it. Now, professionalism has been restored. Finally, Coach Prime, Colorado, they go down to Kansas. Kansas has played 4 ranked games in a row. They've won 3 in a row, lost to Kansas State by 2. First team in FBS history to win 3 games against ranked opponents with a losing record. You didn't want to have to deal with them. Prime did, said after the game, we controlled our destiny and we fumbled it. Now it's coming down to the final weekend for about 8 Big 12 teams.
Yeah, no, I watched more Big 12 yesterday because I mean, again, you're on a 3-hour flight. What are you going to do? You check out every game, and I was really impressed. I mean, Lance Leipold is a really sneaky good coach, and I was glad to see that happen. As far as Colorado, it's a shock to the system to see them lose a game after we had propped them up for the last 9 weeks. But I've got nothing but love for Coach Prime. I'm talking like him now, aren't I?
Yeah, you are. Yeah, go third person. You'll be really good. Did you happen to see the hit, the no call on Shedeur?
I did.
I like, how does that? I mean, officiating right now, I think officiating in college football has not been the greatest, if not the worst we've ever seen. You have to call that.
Yeah, I mean, between that call, the Ryan Williams call, the call at the end of the Auburn game, I mean, there were so many that we could do 5 hours on that. But
I don't feel like getting an email or a text saying
no,
settle down, officials.
I'm retired from talking about officiating.
It's Thanksgiving week. Let's just say we're thankful for everyone who watches and listens to the show, and we're thankful for college football because it's been great. We're going to end on a positive note after such an amazing week of college football. So, final week of the regular season. It's all going to come down to about 5 or 6 games. Thanksgiving weekend. Could we ask for any more, Paul?
No, because I mean, we had Thanksgiving a week early because Matt, last weekend going into it was pretty gloomy. I'm not sure you could have really pointed. I mean, when Ohio State, Indiana is the biggest game in the country, you know it's a weak conversation piece, and it was truly unbelievable. Tennessee was probably the biggest winner, along with Indiana. They literally they beat UTEP and punched the ticket to the playoffs. That's pretty good.
By the way, I will be thinking about you next week in Tuscaloosa. It's probably not going to be the most hospitable situation, but it is the Iron Bowl. Are you going to be okay?
Well, this is the second time we visited Tuscaloosa after a loss this year, so I do have experience at it. And considering that the last time it was 70 degrees and this time the high on Friday is going to be 47, I'm not sure anybody will recognize me because I'm going to be wearing a mask.
Attaboy. Wear a mask, cover up like you never even existed there in Tuscaloosa. We appreciate everybody watching the Matt Barrie Show presented by Allstate. If this week was like the week before and the week before, Feast Week is going to be amazing.